Hello everyone, I hope you're going well. Today I will show you a very nice chess game played by Garry Kasparov against Deep Blue, a chess engine which is actually known for beating Kasparov. So of course there are a big amount of known games by Deep Blue and how Kasparov resigned and so on. So that is actually a pretty harsh story. There are also, a lot of theory saying that Kasparov was paid to lose against the engine. Personally, my CHESSTABLE YouTube channel thinks that it is difficult to analyze an engine game, but it isn't that difficult when actually a human manages to beat the engine, because the engine is known for not making any mistakes. But today we will see what happened when the engine plays a lot worse than a real human. So knight f3 played by Garry Kasparov, d5 and g3. The idea is just to play bishop g2 and castles. Bishop g4, which is a very good line. The idea is just to play knight f6, queen d7, knight c6, and castles fast. And then, of course, knight f6, h5, h4, and it is a very difficult line. We can also play knight f6, e6, bishop d6. This is something that I would recommend you. But okay, pawn b3, that is just to play bishop b2, knight d7, bishop b2, and e6. If you go e5, then the pawn is hanging, and taking on f3 and playing e5 might make some sense, but the white is just going to castle, and white has a bishop pair and two strong bishops in the center of the board, and on these two beautiful diagonals. So e6, just making sure that all the pieces will take part into the game. Bishop g2, knight gf6. So the idea of that move is actually because it seems like it is a logical move, so why would I explain this move? Because c5 is also pretty interesting. The thing is, what we want to do with the black pieces is actually to go eventually, at some point bring the queen out somewhere and castle queen side, because we already developed many pieces on the queen side. So knight f6 is just a very flexible move. Castles, c6, preparing bishop d6 at some point, and the center is very strong with the pawn on c6 and on e6. d3, bishop d6, knight bd2, castles, h3, bishop h5, which is an interesting move. Usually we take there, and for example rook e8, e3, and the position is very difficult, e5, c4, and yeah, there are many games, a lot of possible lines, but in that game the engine is preferring bishop h5. But okay, e3, h6, e5 is possible. The idea is just to go e4, but we can actually play e4 by ourselves, and even if this bishop is closed, it doesn't matter, because we will go knight c4, the bishop will go somewhere, a5, and then bishop c1 and bishop g5. Okay, let's go back. It is very positional chess. h6, eventually preparing e5, e4, and the same variation, but the bishop on c1 won't be able to go on g5. So queen e1, just getting out of the pin, and queen a5. e5 was still possible, but again, e4, d4, knight there, bishop e7. Not bishop c7 because of bishop a3 potentially, but even a4 is a good move. But bishop e7, a4, and eventually bishop a3 in order to trade off the dark square bishop. And this knight is pretty strong. The e5 pawn might be a weakness, or at the very least a target. So queen e1, queen a5, just eventually, just bring the queen into the game, eventually preparing bishop a3 or bishop b4. a3, stopping bishop a3 and bishop g4. And now bishop c7, which is a very strange move. So the queen needs some flexibility. Notice that all the squares on the queen sides are pretty good controlled. So bishop c7 is just cutting, it is just keeping the queen on the queen side, but we might need that in the center. But okay, knight h4. So in that position, Kasparov thinks that this knight is pretty dubious, so he wants to improve the position by eventually putting the other knight on f3 or preparing g4, f4, knight f3. So it is just a move which is trying to improve the position. We can also say that if a6, g4, and knight takes g6, and the pawn structure is destroyed. So black has to stay precise, and this is exactly what Deep Blue would do. Boom, pawn g5. The idea is very simple. If g4, we take there, and okay, black is just doing fine. Too many weaknesses, too many holes. So let's go back. After g5, knight f3 was played, and now, of course, e5. Okay. That is a very, very, very interesting position. For a good reason, black is super active. Black took a lot of space with the central pawns and the pawn on g5. So it seems like that black is super active. But of course, in chess, nothing is black or white. Everything has to be brown, green, and tra-la-la. So e4 was played because e4 might be a threat, trying to dislodge the knight and, trying to open up more lines. So e4 is just stopping the pawns from marching forward. d4 isn't any problem because we can at the very least play knight c4, and we are having a great, great, great position right now. Many active pieces. We can at some point go c3, destroying the pawn structure, and attack the e5 pawn, which is now our target. So we do have a lot of choices. So of course, rook fe8, maintaining the tension. That is actually something important for anyone. Keep in mind that if you want to get something out of position, you shouldn't decide what type of structure you want. You prefer to actually keep the tension. And there is also a reason why I prefer to keep the tension. If you keep the tension, no one can take. If white takes, then knight takes, and notice that everything is weak. The pawn will march forward, the e-file is now open or half open, so that is not good for white. And if black takes, then white can take with the knight or with the pawn, and there is an open d-file, and white is of course a little bit better. And of course, the c4 square might be weak at some point. For example, pawn takes, rook there, or even rook d8. There is a target over there. That's easy to actually have a nice position now. Okay, let's go back. Rook fe8, and now of course knight h2. I say of course because you still want to improve that knight, but you cannot put it on f1. Putting it on b1 doesn't make any sense. Okay, we can trade the queens off, but doesn't change anything. After, for example, d4, you're one move away from going on b5 on c4, but after pawn c5, black might actually be a lot faster. So knight h2, preparing eventually this knight on f3, and also some g4 moves. Queen b6, making sure that f4 can never be played, and eventually preparing a5, a4, and if we take, the bishop is hanging on b2. So it is again a very strategical move. Queen c1, defending the bishop and eventually preparing f4 at some point. a5, marching on with an attack. Rook e1, overprotecting the center. You can go look at the most recent uploads to see a very nice game about overprotecting. Bishop d6, eventually preparing to attack the a3 pawn or going on c5 and attack the f2 pawn. Knight df1, preparing knight e3, which is improving the position of the knight. And now d takes e4, which is a very strange move because, of course, bishop takes won't be played because black would just have a magnificent position. Many pawns marching forward. It is a real attack which is coming. Knight f6, e4, or f5, or g4. There are too many moves available for black. So of course, after pawn takes, we have to play pawn takes. And white will at some point play g4 and rook d1. And now the d-file is open, and there are some weaknesses and some targets on the d-file. So bishop c5, knight e3, we have to protect the f2 pawn, which was actually getting attacked. And now rook a d8, bring all the pieces into the attack. Okay, knight hf1. So it seems like that white is doing nothing with their knights, knight h2, knight e3, but the knight on e3 is super active. It can jump on the e5 square, on the f5 square, on the c4 square. Now we just have to improve that knight. So knight hf1 makes sense. We want knight e2, knight e2 and knight c4. Because this battery is pretty strong, so if we manage to dislodge the bishop or the queen out of the diagonal, then we might get a clear advantage. g4, very, 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 very interesting move. Notice that in that position, we have to realize that this bishop on h5 was super active. It was controlling an open d-file, so it was stopping white from actually putting a rook on this file. But after g4, it's not the case anymore. So we could go for h4, but eventually it might, create some new weaknesses to go on, for example, the f3 square. So this is not something that white wants to see, because white doesn't want to trade off the light square bishop. And for example, bishop g6 is already a move attacking this pawn on e4 and knight d2, and somehow all white's pieces can't really move. That is very, very strange. That is not a good position for white. So h takes g4, knight takes, and now f3, which is incredible because Kasparov is just opening up this diagonal. But after the move king h1 or king h2, then actually the pawns are pretty solid, the knight is pretty active, and if we trade off, let's say this, if we trade this black square bishop off, then now we are the one controlling dark squares in the center. Okay, so bishop e7, king h1, just making sure that the knight can take part into the game, and bishop g5, pinning the knight from the other side. So the engine isn't, the engine isn't joking. Rook e2, preparing queen g1 or queen e1 so that the knight won't be pinned anymore. And a4, again, the engine is super duper active. Just attacking on the queen side, attacking on the king side. The engine is playing a perfect chess game. b4 and f5, which is eventually a mistake. Probably trying c5, eventually, trying to open up even more files can be possible. Yeah, so this is something that probably would give black more winning chances. But f5 is very strange. It is playing on the tactical fact that after pawn takes, there is pawn e4, and there are billions of pins. But the engine managed to understand that if the pawn moves, then the rook on e2 is hanging. But what Kasparov managed to understand is that we do not care about that rook. f4, we sacrifice the rook. If bishop takes e2, like happened in the game, we can just take on g5. And now we have a real problem, because even if we take back, there are too many weaknesses. We can go knight g4. Now g5 is hanging, and even though black is up in exchange, because black is up in exchange, everything is super weak, and the black king might get checkmated. So notice that even though the engine can calculate everything billions of times faster than us, we have something that he doesn't have, creativity. And for the one who asked, there is no bishop g4, there's queen g5, and the very least checkmate, and if king f7, checkmate again. So let's go back. Kasparov managed to understand that, not the engine. It means that creativity might actually destroy the engine. Now knight e5, stopping any knight g4 move, but now g6. And okay, black is up in exchange, but white does have a pawn for the exchange and two fabulous passed pawns, and b2 bishop, and eventually some attack on the h6 square. So bishop f3 and now bishop c3, just preparing queen b2 and bringing the rook into the game. Queen b5 and queen f1, which is an incredible move, because Kasparov is just trading off. That is incredible. Kasparov is just trading off the queens and says that these two pawns are a lot stronger. That's funny, because now Stockfish says it is +1 for white. Actually, during the sacrifice, the engine says, yeah, black is better after f4. But yeah, and now the engine says that actually white is better after the trade of the queens. Yeah, after the queen trade. h5, now king g1, just making sure that this bishop isn't pinned anymore. King f8, just trying to, to wait, I guess. But now, after bishop h3, like happened in the game, the pawns will just march forward, and that's basically the end. b5, king f2, king g7, g4, just opening up more lines, king there. If you take the pawn, then there is bishop takes g4 and the knight is pinned, or even knight takes. So king h6 and now rook g1, just defending the g4 pawn. H takes, bishop takes, knight takes, rook takes, and now black is still up in exchange, but the e4 pawn might fall down. These two pawns will both promote to a queen, and after rook d5, f6, rook d1 and g7, black resigned. So, to answer the question, how to use the engine to become a chess master, that is pretty simple. The engine plays super solid chess. The engine is just improving the whole position after each move. So this is something that you have to do. With that, you have to be creative. Notice that Kasparov just beat an engine. That is not easy. Sometimes if you take back some moves, you might actually beat the engine, but it's not easy, because the engine can calculate 15 billions of moves way before anything, actually. So hopefully you understood how to use the engine to become a chess master. Thank you very much. See you in the future. Don't forget to subscribe, to share the video. See you in the future. Take care.